All right, so thank you for sitting down with us today. We really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
So you've got a very interesting background. You've former Supreme Court Justice. We were just talking before we started the video. You were on a board of regents for secondary and elementary education. And you've also got the whole Central Falls receiver background. So you've got a pretty diverse background. You've got a lot of experiences. Could you just, take a couple minutes and explain, given that that background, why did you decide to run for U.S. Senate?
Right. Well, the good thing about my background is I've really served in all three branches of government. In an executive capacity with being the receiver in Central Falls. I've been counsel to several governors, including Governor Sullivan, Democrats and Republicans, Independents. I've been an elected town councilman in my hometown, then hometown of Barrington, served for 2 terms there. So in addition to the judicial work, I've done a lot of other government-related work, all the while being mostly anchored in private law practice. I've been the head of our litigation practice groups at some of the biggest firms in Rhode Island, and also had my own small business firm, a boutique that concentrated on litigation, business litigation. So I've got a lot of experience as a problem solver, someone that brings disparate parties together with different points of view. And the Central Falls experience, I think, really illustrated that that approach can really help to take a very difficult, if not intractable situation and come out with a result that is much better than what I found it to be. And it was consensual. The thing that people need to remember about Central Falls was that was a consensual arrangement with the 3 unions, the retirees, and the active employees. All came to agreements, given the very bad financial situation in that city, what they agreed to do in order to restructure the government to get to a balanced budget and a plan of recovery for the city, which, if followed, as happily it has been for 5 years, would lead to much better prosperity and economically sound stability. So I think that experience of problem solving in Central Falls and working as an arbitrator, a mediator in my law practice, and all the other experiences I'd like to bring to Washington, because I think the reason I'm running is I'm disgusted, frankly, as many others are, with the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing there. We got people down there who are fighting with each other and not working to try and solve our nation's problems by compromising, by coming up with solutions to the vexing issues that are troubling us today, whether it's immigration, whether it's healthcare, whether it's infrastructure, regulatory overreach, you name it. So I'd like to go down there and bring that skill set to Washington, and I think I can make a bigger difference than the current incumbent, because he's hyper-partisan, number one. Number two, we've got a Republican-controlled executive branch, Republican-controlled Congress. Wouldn't it make sense for Rhode Islanders to have somebody down there wearing the same jersey as the team that's on the field, instead of sitting in the stands throwing around tomatoes and trying to disrupt and obstruct everything that we need to do to get this country and Rhode Island to a better place. So all of that is a lengthy answer to why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Sure. What are some of the issues you think that you could make a difference on? In other words, you mentioned immigration, healthcare. How would you be able to maybe reach across the aisle and solve some of these problems? Because it seems to me like a lot of the times when or if someone tries to reach across the aisle, the leadership of their own party tries to kind of pull them back. And I think we're seeing that with this Supreme Court nominee, Kavanaugh, I believe is his name. I've noticed that some of the Democrats from so-called red states who might be inclined to support his elevation to the Supreme Court are kind of under pressure from Minority Leader Chuck Schumer because he doesn't want this thing to go forward. How would you act to counterbalance that, or what could you do?
Yeah, because I'm doing this not to please President Trump or Mitch McConnell or any other Republican. I'm running as a Republican because I believe in less government and more freedom and private enterprise and less regulation and all of that. But I'm doing this to help Rhode Islanders. I want to do a better job for the average working family here in this state and for small business in particular than we're seeing. So I'm at the stage of my life, I'm not a career politician. I want to give back to a state that's been terrific to me and enabled me to make a very good living. A kid coming from a very humble background, working at all these manual labor jobs to put myself through school. I came here, worked hard, got a good education, and now I want to give back to a state that's been great to me. So I don't have the same concerns that apparently a lot of other politicians do. I'm not there to make political points. I'm there to do what's right by Rhode Island. And I think that there are others who are centrists like myself, people who are not ideologues, people who want to get things done. And I think they're waiting for more people to show some leadership and reach across the aisle in a way that senators down there used to get things done. The image of President Reagan, going toe-to-toe with Tip O'Neill, but then they would sit down and have a drink together and try and work out compromises that were good for the country. So I think we need more of that, and I'd like to be part of that. I'd like to, in effect, play a leadership role in getting that done.
Okay. What national issues, or what issues, I guess I should say, that are being debated or considered on the national level do you care most about? I know you were on the Board of Regents for Education, so I would assume that would maybe be an issue, or maybe what are the other ones?
Certainly, education is way up there. Let's take the issue of school security. I think we're doing a horrible job securing our schools. Unfortunately, we need to do a better job in light of all the school shooting incidents that are occurring. I believe the first step we need to take is to beef up our school security so that our kids aren't sitting ducks for these maniacal killers that show up and are able to put away 10, 20, 30 people before the police arrive.
Would be nice.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Sure.
So that our grandchildren and kids are protected. Now, we don't like it at airports, we don't like it at courthouses, we don't like it when we go to see a basketball game and we have to go through some sort of a screening, but it's a fact of life today. And why should our most precious assets, our kids, be sitting ducks for these people? So to me, so I'd like to see more of a national effort to help organize, perhaps recruit retired military, retired police officers to help staff, try and keep the costs down. But we need to organize that effort. We need to do a better job in taking schools off the hit me list from these folks who know that they're not going to meet with any resistance now if they show up with some sort of a weapon, because these are gun-free school zones, so-called, and they have a free pass at slaughtering our children. So that's one issue.
Sure.
Healthcare. We've got to get to a better place with healthcare. Prescription drug prices are the highest in the world in this country. That's unacceptable. We need to free up the government's leverage to negotiate lower prices. For some reason, the federal government has tied its own hands and said they can't negotiate through Medicare and Medicaid to get lower prices. That makes no sense to me. Let's use all the leverage we have as a federal government, as a huge consumer of drugs, to lower drug prices, allow more competition into the system, allow associations of physicians and even business people and businesses to form healthcare plans. We need to introduce more competition, more transparency into the system, more ability to shop for doctors based on outcomes. So I want to work on comprehensive healthcare reform, and that's going to take a compromise. It can't be in my way or the highway by one party or the other. They've got to work together. If it means saving some of Obamacare to make it happen, then so be it. If it means that we need to do things differently, as I've been suggesting, more competition, then I'm all for that. But I'm against going to a socialistic, Bernie Sanders, Sheldon Whitehouse type, all one-payer, government-run healthcare system.
Well, that was one of my next questions I was going to ask you. It kind of dovetails into it because you're right. There are a contingent of people out there who think that we should, expand Medicare for all. But right now, I believe the federal budget is at least 2/3 entitlements, which is Medicare, Social Security, programs, mostly those two. So my question is, what should we do, or what could we do to try to get that behemoth under control? Because we have $20 trillion in debt, and those two areas tend to drive those deficits that we run on a yearly basis. And I understand that Social Security is slated to not be able to meet its obligations within the next 20 to 25 years at the rate we're currently on. So, and against that backdrop, what do you think we should do about some of these entitlements? Should we fund them more? Should we cut them back? Should we do some combination of both? How do you envision this problem as being addressed?
A combination of things. Certainly, as I suggested, more competition into the healthcare system. We've got to, right now there are pharmacy benefit managers and these group purchasing organizations. They need to be broken up. They're gobbling up a lot of the profits and cost. Big pharma is profiting at the expense of the rest of the healthcare system. We need more competition, more buying insurance across state lines, more transparency, and getting, as I said, the federal government to use its leverage to negotiate lower drug prices. So a whole range of things like that need to happen in order to get the system more competitive. And there's no reason we should be paying the highest drug prices in the world. There's no reason why we shouldn't be allowed to buy healthcare plans, we buy insurance for cars, which is what we do across state lines. Let's open up the healthcare system. And instead of having one size fits all, let people tailor their insurance, their plans to what best suits their personal needs. So I'm a big believer in competition, and for too long we've insulated the healthcare system from competition on the theory that it could be harmful. And to some extent, that concern is valid, but we've gone overboard the other way. And I think it would be a big mistake to go to all government sponsored, because that would eliminate the competition, and the cost would be through the roof.
Absolutely. I think that's a good explanation of the healthcare issue. But also, I'd like to ask you about the Social Security issue. And I know that President Trump has completely avoided this issue. During the primary, he basically didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to address it. He hasn't had any ideas on how to fix Social Security. So I guess I would just ask you: do you think Social Security needs to be fixed, or do you think it's going to be fine somehow, or do you think it needs some type of reform? How would you look at that issue, or how do you look at that issue?
Well, Social Security is one of those programs that has been called the third rail of politics.
Right.
Anybody who tries to touch it
is gone.
Is theoretically signing his or her own death warrant. So whatever is done with Social Security, I do agree that something needs to be done. There needs to be bipartisan support for it, because it's not going to happen if one party or the other, they will get blamed, and it'll be one of these things where it never happened. So you need to have a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans working together to experiment and look at all these potential options. And you're familiar with some of them that have been floated. There already have been adjustments. We've raised the age, we've waited, people are living longer, they're retiring and surviving much longer, which is mostly a good thing, but it also increases the expense. And so, that some adjustments there may be in order. From time to time, people have floated the idea of means testing for Social Security. Again, these are things that, if they are to be implemented need wide bipartisan support. And typically with the government, it doesn't happen until we get either a crisis itself or
just take a drive up to Central Falls and
right
exactly what you're talking about.
So it takes political courage to do these things, and we need the facts. But so those are the kind of problems I'd love to work on.
Yeah.
To help get us to a better place.
It's an interesting point that you make, that it needs to be bipartisan, and it just speaks to the need for senators and representatives to work together, because one party alone can't just stand up and say we're going to fix Social Security, because then the other party will attack that party and say that you're trying to hurt people. So it needs to be both parties working together, or else we're never going to get a solution to that. And I think that's a good point.
Right, and that's been the problem with health care too. I mean, Obamacare was an all Democratic situation. Republicans finally took control. They tried to push through their own plan, all Republican supported. That didn't make it. So the lesson for me is let's work together. Something as important as that. We need bipartisan support, and that means compromise. You can't get everything you want from one side or the other. So let's take a page from history and work together to come up with a compromise solution that will enjoy bipartisan support, and that will ensure the longevity that Obamacare lacked and the Republican plan never got to see the light of day.
Interesting. It seems like you're calling for a move away from the hyper-partisanship that we see on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Totally fair. That's exactly what I'm calling for.
Sure. That's an interesting point, especially when you frame it in the context of problems, massive problems like Social Security, like healthcare.
Like Central Falls.
Like Central Falls, which is, I think, a great test case for what happens when you wait too long. Right. If you wait too long, you're going to get in a situation where you're bankrupt, and a receiver has to come in, and someone like you has to come in and try to straighten out the problem.
And it's painful, and it's a very difficult thing. It takes its human toll, but human nature being what it is, sometimes the situation is such that you have to let no good crisis go to waste. Yeah.
The longer you put off a problem, the harder it becomes to solve in the future.
So true.
What is your position or your stance on the very hot topic, hyper-partisan, again, issue of immigration? What do you think should be done to solve this problem? I am guessing you're going to recommend that some type of bipartisan solution be crafted, but what would it look like in your imagination?
Well, it would definitely, yes, it has to be a bipartisan solution. It would look like increased border security. It would look like some accommodation for the so-called dreamers that are here that may or may not involve citizenship, but it would involve some accommodation where they would be allowed to stay legally. It would involve, one hopes, reform of the existing immigration system to allow for more jobs and skill-based criteria for having people come here, and less chain immigration and less this visa system that sort of spreads it around to everybody based on quotas for given countries and things. So we need a compromise, a solution there. We've got 11 million undocumented, apparently, that are here. A lot of it is visa overstays. A lot of it is related to jobs that business needs or have felt they needed to use our immigrant population. So we've got to put all of that together in a way where no one's going to be totally happy, but we'll be in a better place than we are now.
Sure. You had mentioned earlier that you want to become the next U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, and that if you do, you're not going to become just a rubber stamp for someone like Mitch McConnell or someone like President Trump. So against that backdrop, what is something that you can point to that you would say that you disagree with the president on? What has the president done that you say, geez, I don't know if I agree with that?
Tariffs. Let's start with tariffs. Okay. I think this is hurtful to the nation and Rhode Island, what he's trying to do across the board. I don't fault him for wanting to make sure we're treated fairly on tariffs, but I don't approve of these large, across-the-board, high tariffs, because in the end, that's a hidden tax increase on Rhode Islanders in the country, because there will be retaliation, and there already is retaliation going on from other countries. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't push back at China for stealing our intellectual property, for Russia, for all the nefarious electioneering gamesmanship it's playing and disrupting our elections and trying to do that. But I believe that we need to have fair trade and freer trade rather than punishing our allies in particular for no good reason, in my opinion, except to try and dramatically cause them to buckle to unreasonable demands.
Sure. Very interesting, because that's a hot button issue right now as well. And I think that there are many Republicans who disagree with tariffs, but from what I'm reading, a lot of them are afraid to go against President Trump because he's so popular with his base, as we've seen with people like Bob Corker or Jeff Flake. You know, they kind of spoke out against the president, and they suffered greatly from it. They decided to not seek re-election.
I'm sure you know, Russell, that Rhode Island's demographic and its involvement with President Trump and approvals and all that are very different from Tennessee or Arizona
sure.
or any of these states. So, you know, as I've said in other contexts, I'm going to be supportive of President Trump when he does things that are beneficial to Rhode Islanders and to our country. But when he does things like the tariffs or some of the behavior he's exhibited towards other allies that I think are hurtful to Rhode Island, then I'm going to speak out and I'm going to stand up to them. And again, I'm fortunate in that I'm not a career politician. I'm not going down there to make a long career for myself. I'm doing this to give back to a state that's been good to me and not to please the president or the majority leader. Okay.
In the same light, what's something that Senator Whitehouse, the incumbent who you're running against, what is something he's done that you would have done differently and that you think would have benefited all of us, all of the Rhode Islanders?
We don't have a long time here, but I can focus on one thing or two things to give you an illustration. One of the things that's most troubling that's going on in this country and in Rhode Island is the opioid crisis. 6 deaths a week here, untold deaths across the country, and Senator Whitehouse unfortunately co-sponsored legislation that gutted the Drug Enforcement Agency's ability to crack down on pill mills that were flooding the market with these ultra-addictive substances. Certainly, I would never have done that, and I think we should repeal that legislation and give back the DEA its enforcement powers. But worse, while he was doing it, he was taking contributions from Big Pharma and investing in Big Pharma. So, you know, that's the kind of recipe for corruption and for conflict of interest that is unacceptable. And I've said I'm not going to take any contributions from Pharma. I'm not going to, obviously, if I get elected, I'm not going to do the kind of insider trading that Senator Whitehouse is engaged in. I'm going to put my assets investable into a blind trust. So, you know, I won't have conflicts of interest by looking over my shoulder as to how this is going to affect my stock portfolio. I think all senators should do that. A number of them do, but not Senator Whitehouse. He'd rather inside trade on the information he gets as a senator and do things like sponsor that DEA legislation.
All right. Well, that's really all I really have for today. Is there anything that you'd like to tell me that maybe I should have asked but I didn't, or anything you'd like to say?
No, I think you
wrap this up.
did a good job of asking me, and I was probably more voluble about things than I should have been. But I think we covered a lot of it. Robert, is there anything else?
Thank you, Judge.
Yeah.
Just Rhode Island, you know, July 4th, you know, it's been really busy. Getting a great reception out there.
Yeah. No, we're in 3 parades, not in, but at 3 parades. It won't let me march because I'm not a candidate. So I go
Oh,
on
not
the
incumbent,
side.
right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Not an incumbent.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing a lot of fundraising and meeting of voters, so it's all good.
Okay, great. Well, we look forward to hearing more from you as we move forward.
Excellent.
All right, thank you, Judge.
So I didn't get a chance to ask you, Russell, are you